Hi fellow artists and art fans, I'm Anne from Anne and Lorenc Art, and on today's vlog I'll be discussing the use of graph paper in place of a grid and what the benefits are to using them and where there might be some challenges in regards to using graph paper versus freehand. So right off the bat, one of the best things about graph paper is being able to do your layouts, right? So sometimes when you're doing drawing freehand, layouting can be a bit of a pain because you're trying to make that judgment of how wide should your border be, how much space do you need, especially if you're doing a more detailed drawing like some of my different panel drawings that I like to do. Anytime I do a panel drawing, I usually will start with graph paper first, just because I can lay everything out. So I really like the opportunity to be able to use symmetry, or even if it's asymmetrical, but being able to keep that balance and like really plot out where I want my different panel sections to be, where I want a specific border. Particularly when I do a series like my Saints series, you'll see in those they're very specifically paneled out, and I always start them on graph paper first. It also saves you time in the sense of you don't necessarily have to go through all the measurements. Like let's say you're going more freehand but you prefer to use a ruler, which is totally cool, you can use that, but you're sitting there and you're having to mark out, you know, how far across do you need to go with you know, like how many inches or millimeters or centimeters if you're, you know, on the metric system. And sometimes that can be a little tedious. I know as an artist, I tend to like to just get right into drawing, and I like to spend more time drawing than doing math. Now, for those of you that like doing math a lot and you like that precision of math, there is nothing wrong with that. Like, you can get some really precise measurements, and it's really cool. I've seen some great stuff done using math to create art. I particularly don't like to do that much math. So with the grid, with the graph paper, everything's already laid out, and that's why I like to use this graph paper. It's 1-inch squares with, it's like 10 by 10 small squares inside. I'll try to get the exact measurements on exactly the one I do, but you can use whatever graph paper and then you just adapt it to, you know, your drawing. Also with the graph paper, your lines are already there, so you've seen in some of my drawings, sometimes it's a little quicker to do the initial sketch with the graph paper because I don't have to try to eyeball exactly where my lines are going to meet up. They'll be pretty much right there for me, and I just have to just go across with however many squares I want. Right, so that's layouting. Oh, it also helps you kind of keep focus. So with the graph paper, you have a limited amount of space, and the grids on the graph paper will kind of help keep you more contained, so you're less likely to go off on a tangent somewhere else with your art. That being said, sometimes you want to do that. So one of the benefits to drawing freehand completely is that you're not limited to your graph paper. Sometimes the graph paper can be a little constricting in that sense, especially if you're doing a more free-form shape, like you're drawing people or animals, unless you're doing a very specific type of interlaced animal and you want that, again, that precision of keeping everything in symmetry. But I find, like with my Celtic animals that I do, I like to do them completely freehand. I usually will not do them on graph paper first because I want that freedom for the line to be able to go where I want it to go and not feel that I have to put it right here. Sometimes that graph paper can put that pressure on you to be like, oh, it has to be perfect. It has to be this exact spot that I want it to be in. And when you're doing art, sometimes you want that and sometimes you don't. And if you look at a lot of the different monuments and even in some of the illustrated manuscripts, the lines are not always perfect. So sometimes there's a difference in the thickness of the lines and sometimes there's not. So there's there's benefits to having it look super precise, and then there's benefits to letting it be a little bit more organic. Okay, so the other thing that graph paper is good for is it's good for doing rough drafts. Like, you could get a pad or you could get a set of graph paper pads for under $20, and you get like 10 of those pads. Like, I got the ones that I've been working on recently from Staples and I got like a pack of 10. I think it might have been 9 or 10, and I got it for I think under $20, and it's like 50 sheets in each pad of paper, so that's like 100 sheets right there. Now, if I'm going with regular drawing paper as a rough draft, that tends to be a bit more expensive. Yes, you can get the dollar pads, but I feel like sometimes that paper is a little harder to work with. I like really smooth paper when I draw, so lately what I've been doing for some of my rough drafts is I've been using cardstock. I had gotten this huge pack of cardstock for a different project ways back, and I found it's been coming in very handy for doing quick pieces that I'm not intending to, then go off and sell. Art paper is, for those of you that are currently doing art, it's very expensive. It can be very expensive, and you only get like, 10 to 15, maybe if you're lucky you'll get 25 sheets in a paper. This is my favorite paper to work with when I'm doing my final drafts, not my final drafts, when I'm doing my final originals. I like to use this Strathmore Bristol Smooth 300 pound. It's great for pen and ink, and I'll do more on this another time, but when I do a paper segment. But this one is 9 by 12 inches, and you only get 20 sheets, but this thing costs like almost $10, I think it cost me. So you figure $10 for 20 sheets versus, under $20 for 100 sheets. It's that's some math that's a little easier to do in that sense, so it makes more sense for me to do my rough drafts on graph paper. But again, I generally only do that if I am using it if I have a really complicated drawing that's going to have the different panels in there, or if I'm doing coat of arms. I almost always will exclusively do coat of arms regardless on graph paper, just because there's so much symmetry involved in that, and it's a little bit, you need to be a little bit more precise with that. Also, the other benefit to doing some of your rough drafts on graph paper is that it's easier to find them later, because you won't get them confused with your final copies, because it's going to look different. That being said, if you do a drawing on graph paper first, then you will need to transfer it to better paper, either using a light box, which is my preferred method, or there's other methods that you can use as well, and I'll do a tutorial down the line on some of those. So where you would save time potentially in layouting, you might lose time in that sense of having to redraw your art using a light box or this other or one of the other methods. That being said, drawing freehand, you can go ahead and do start to finish completely on your good paper. Whether I use graph paper or not doesn't really save me too much time, because I will always do my rough draft on either the graph paper, or I'll do it on like something like cardstock or drawing paper, and then or one of my drawing pads. Usually it's from a drawing pad, and then I will put it on a light box. This way I don't get any pencil lines underneath my ink, and I feel like it makes my ink that much more vibrant. And again, that's something I'll talk about at a later date in another video. I don't want to get too far off track here. The other thing with graph paper, sometimes what you'll run into is those little blue lines are actually a bit raised up. So whereas in one way it helps you keep a line straighter because the line is already there, but it can also make your line go sometimes a little crooked, because as you're going along, especially if you're not on one of the bolder, the darker blue line, the whiter lines, and you're doing one of the smaller grid lines, it will sometimes, make your pencil kind of jump a little bit. And you've seen that, I'm sure, in some of my videos where that's happened to me. But it's an easy fix. You just go back, erase, and put it up. So it's not that big a deal, but it's there, so I feel like I should point it out. So sometimes, I mentioned this earlier, so drawing freehand will give you more space to be creative in the sense that you're not going to feel limited by the grids. You're going to know that your line can go wherever you want. So particularly when I'm doing spirals, I find spirals a little easier to do off of graph paper, just because sometimes the squares will, you know, they're kind of mess with your head a little bit. Like they'll be like, oh wait, but in the same sense, sometimes it actually does work well to do spirals even on the graph paper, because you can say, okay, if you're trying to do a particular spiral, it's not too big a deal to do on graph paper, because you can then measure out exactly how far you want those spirals to go. But I kind of like my spirals to be a little bit more organic. Oh, so the other thing that is great with graph paper, again, going back to being able to tell your rough drafts from, you know, your final copies, is that if you're doing, let's say you want to do a motif in the background, like you're doing say like a wave pattern or a spiral pattern motif that takes a really long time to do, and you know you're going to want to use it again in another drawing maybe down the line, and then, you know, trying to like work that all out again, even if you're using it on graph paper in a panel, like a sectioned out panel, sometimes that can be frustrating to do. It sometimes takes a little while. So what I've started doing lately, and I found out it's kind of like a good little like Celtic design hack, is I'll take a piece of graph paper and I will plot out the entire motif, and you could do this for multiple sizes. Let's say you're doing the wave pattern, right? And you just want to do maybe like 3 of those small squares high and do that all the way across and all the way down your paper. Or maybe you want one that's like 5 squares or even the full 10 squares wide, and you can do that with the graph paper and have them ready to go. Then you can go ahead, do your entire drawing, whether you do it on graph paper or on your good paper or rough draft paper, and then when you put it on a light box, you can fill in all the other parts that you already did, unless it's already on a good paper. Then you can just stick your motif paper underneath and just add that in from the light box, and you can have it set up exactly where you need it to be, and you don't have to worry about, you know, one row being, you know, 3 squares and all of a sudden it goes to like 6 squares or something like that. So because you've already spent the time to get that done, and it just saves a lot of time, instead of having to draw the motif again and again and again and again every time that you want to do it. And this is all done on regular paper. I don't use computers for any of this. Not that you can't use computers for it, you could. I just use computers for getting things ready to put onto like t-shirts and stuff like that. Okay, so like I said before, combining graph paper and freehand is also a great way to go. You get the best of both that way. You know, have the stress-free layouting with the graph paper, but then have the freedom of the freehand drawing to make some really cool effects and drawings. So which is better, graph paper or freehand? I find them both useful. I think it depends. I mean, they both have challenges and they both have a lot of benefits. So what I recommend doing is trying both methods and see which one works best for you. I like a combination. Again, like I said, if I'm doing a full paneled piece, anything that I want to use to tell a story, I tend to use graph paper, because I can work out my borders and my panel sections the way that I want them and make sure that it all fits onto one page. But then I also like to do completely freehand for things like when I draw my animals, or if I'm drawing people, or and then sometimes, like, you know, I do these seashells, and and when you do a shell, you know, you can't put any graph paper on there, so it's all pretty organic there. So I use freehand for the shells that I decorate. You know, it's a lot of fun either way. So let me know in the comments which way you prefer, or if you like that combination. Definitely hit that like button if you found any of this useful, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for future videos. Okay, and so that's everything for today. And again, I'm Anne from Anne M. Lorenc Art, and until next time, happy adventuring in art. Bye!